Hello and welcome. Joe Holbrook here with Cloud Bursting Corp. Looking forward to spending the next 45 minutes with you covering CompTIA Cloud Plus certification. This is CompTIA's gold standard. This is pretty much the gold standard when it comes to non-vendor biased exams around the cloud. So let's do a quick intro here. Basically, I'm based out in Jacksonville, Florida. I've been a consulting cloud architect, data storage architect for quite a while. Not to date myself, but well over 15 plus years. Also been a government contractor and consultant off and on for about 10 years as well. Been focused quite a bit on security as well. And of course, I am a CompTIA subject matter expert as well, which is a great opportunity for those that have been able to participate. Do hold other certs from major vendors as well as EMC, HPE, VMware, AWS, and Google Cloud as well. And I hold, at least 7 CompTIA certs as well. So with that said. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the CompTIA Cloud Plus. One of the challenges right now for folks in the IT industry is even though you're competent in what you do, even though you're competent in Microsoft, even though you're competent in HP or Unix systems or Linux, the reality is the cloud is eating your lunch. And in most cases, if you haven't had your lunch taken away by the cloud, then you will. And there's a lot of reasons for that, of course. But the main driver is financial engineering. It is definitely focused around reducing costs, trying to get quarterly earnings to be where they are. And, again, there's also other benefits and reasons to go to the cloud as well. Again, if you're a smaller company, going to the cloud can give you access to resources you couldn't afford otherwise. But in reality, if you work for a larger company and you're in infrastructure, my advice to you is to, pay attention to that yellow light. It's going to turn here if it hasn't. So let's talk about the exam, why you need to have a cloud cert. We'll talk about the exam objectives. We're going to talk about some of the content. What I did is I threw 2 things in here as sort of a bonus. If you've taken other videos or training classes on the cloud that were, real short boot camps or intros, one of the things that they don't typically do is give you some example questions to get you thinking about maybe, am I prepared or not? Or what should I focus on preparing? So let's go ahead and talk about the exam itself. So the exam put out by CompTIA, the current version is CVO-001. This is likely going to be updated later this year or next year. So for those folks that have not taken the Cloud Plus, my recommendation is you take it now before they update it. Again, if you can, I don't know everyone's situation, but my thought is typically when any organization updates an exam, it usually gets a little harder. And CompTIA typically is not any different there as well. So it's 100 questions. This is a lengthy exam. This is going to take you a couple hours to go through in reality as far as preparing for the content. Now the test itself, you get about, 90 minutes. So now if you do the math, that is less than a minute per question. So you're going to go into overdrive taking this test. And again, when I cover the domains, I'm going to sort of cover some areas I think you should focus on more than others. It's $294. Now, There's plenty of CompTIA discounts out there from especially like the McGrath-Hill books, I believe, and then a couple other sites and authors as well. You could probably cut about $30 off in the cost if you find the voucher. Matter of fact, I do have a link or two. I'll go ahead and post it on the YouTube site if that helps. Now, if you're in IT now, like I was saying, I've been in IT for probably longer than 15 years. It's probably going on 20 if I count the military experience when I was in the Navy. Now, one of the challenges that I am finding right now is that you don't have enough skills, and it's the truth, because again, if you're in a good, safe job, good for you. But if you're not in a good, safe job right now, you need to get certified around the cloud. Whether it's a vendor or non-vendor bias, you have to establish that baseline, because companies aren't making money in general. And when this happens, and for those that have been through the dot-com days, you know this all too well. Companies, they start slashing jobs. It's just a fact. And this is what we're seeing right now. We're starting to see big vendors. I mean, you can think of a big vendor. They're going all out, laying off thousands and thousands of people. So one of the challenges, whether you work for a vendor or an infrastructure company, you need to establish yourself as knowledgeable in the cloud, because even if you go work for that Fortune 500 company or that company down the road from you that has 1,000 employees, whatever it is, chances are they're going to have infrastructure, but they're also going to put cloud services up and running as well if they don't already have it. So common use cases around the cloud right now: Office 365, big time. It's a big driver right now. Platform as a service. This is a hot area. One of my favorite areas. Azure, Pivotal, and even Google now is really starting to knock it out of the park. And when we talk about the industry itself, I just need to reiterate, a few things as well. Before I forget, before I touch on like the government part of the cloud business, I did want to just cover one thing that I also have noticed as well. There are definitely certain vendors that have very solid, well-written exams. And in my opinion, if you just get any cloud cert out there, you at least have established some baseline. But again, one of the things I recommend before you take any certification is to definitely understand where you are in your career and where you want to go, because one of the things you're going to have to do is reinvent yourself. I've personally known 3 or 4 people that have had to change jobs, and again, they have to reinvent themselves. They were doing Microsoft Windows. They were doing Linux. They were doing networking, like Cisco networking. Like, who'd have thought Cisco, would be an area of focus? But it is, and you just have to reinvent yourself. So this is why I'm doing this, because I'm really seeing some patterns here, and there's some big changes coming. A lot of it, unfortunately, is not due to technology. It's all due to the quarterly earnings, and companies have to financial engineer. And if you think for 1 second, you're working in a company, whatever it is, and the services are running in-house, and if you think for 1 second Amazon or Google or Microsoft Azure, let's just say the 3 big players, never mind Rackspace and CenturyLink and all these other vendors that are out there, are not talking to the C-level suite as well as the board of directors and trying to sell them to go to the cloud, you would be foolish, just being honest. I've been on numerous calls. I can tell you right now, I know 2 companies that just are going to just do this without even telling their IT staff. Unfortunately, this is how it's working. So go out there, get certified. This is not something that you need to take lightly. You really need to focus on the cloud. Now, what I'd like to do is take a minute and talk about FedRAMP. Now, for those folks that are in the federal government or work for a government contractor, FedRAMP and FISMA, which I don't have here, I'm not going to cover FedRAMP or FISMA in detail, but I wanted to just point out one thing, that typically the government is usually 2 to 3 years behind what the commercial sector does, and the government right now is really getting into the cloud. I've been on numerous engagements and calls around different departments and divisions of the government sector in the last few years, and I can tell you that they're getting on board, and FedRAMP is something you may want to know. I'll do another chapter on that, but for this course, this is a generic Cloud Plus. I don't want to take too much time on FedRAMP. So one of the questions I get typically is, what cloud cert is better than others? And again, I don't have a preference per se, but I can tell you that the CompTIA Cloud certs, whether it's Essentials or Cloud Plus here, either or, are going to be recognized. In other words, industry recognizes these certs as a viable cert. So this is a good thing. So you can't go wrong taking a CompTIA cert in most cases. Now, the other challenge about CompTIA certs, so I'll be very honest, is that I've seen a lot of organizations think that CompTIA certs are basic, they're not advanced. And that is where the challenge comes in. Some of the certs from CompTIA, like the CASP, is advanced. It's a very difficult cert, very technical cert. But again, this is just some things to see. So my advice, focus on what you really need to. You go out there, get AWS. That's going to be very well recognized. GCP, Microsoft Azure, Rackspace as well. Plenty of options out there. Never mind vendors like VMware, EMC. EMC's got a very great cert as well around the cloud. They've got a couple very difficult, very challenging cert, to be honest. Much more advanced than any of these, in my opinion. But again, let's talk about Cloud Plus. Okay, let's talk about the objectives. So typically when I teach these courses from CompTIA, it's very important that I break down the domains, and I spend a little time talking about what we're going to cover, how we're going to cover it, why it's important to cover. Because, again, one of the challenges to taking any exam is to understand what is on the exam and also try to understand where you have to focus. So every person that may be on the call or may be in the session will look at this and have, at least, if I have 12 people, there'll be 12 different opinions of what they're going to do better. So some folks may do very well at, domain 1. Some folks may do very well at 2 or 7 or 6, vice versa. And so it's important that you look at this and focus and pick out, 70% of the domains and really focus hard and make sure you get it. It's okay not to have to focus on one domain if you're already knowledgeable, because from a time perspective, you will likely pass a test. And you don't need to get 100 on the exam to pass. You just need to get whatever the passing score is, like a 750. Now remember too, CompTIA, and I don't believe I have the slide in here. I don't. They use a different scaling as well. And we'll talk about that as well. I do have a slide at the end. I'll go through the scaling with you. So the first one is going to be around cloud concepts and models. Now, this is an area of focus. This is probably, in my opinion, the easiest part of the test. We're going to talk about platform as a service. We're going to talk about SaaS. We're going to talk about infrastructure as a service. We're going to talk about deployment models, service models. NIST is going to be very important to know for the test as well. 2.0 is around virtualization. So we're going to want to get to know the hypervisors. Very important. Types of virtualization as well. Infrastructure, we're going to talk about Speeds and feeds, hardware, that's the infrastructure. Data centers. Managing resources, right? This is an area where a lot of companies don't do very well at. Again, this is how you monitor and manage and deal with provisioning issues, areas like that. Like, for example, very common, I've done a lot of VMware assessments in the past, and I can tell you right now, a lot of companies don't have any idea of how much waste they have in their virtualized environments in a lot of cases. And that all costs money down the road. So, and when you get to the cloud, you definitely don't want to do that. For example, if you have too many VMs provisioned or too many snapshots set up, that's costing you money. If you don't have a backup plan, and instead of recovering a file, you recover a whole Glacier, instance, again, you're going to get slammed with a lot of charges that you may not have expected. Security, this is a big deal in the cloud. I love talking about security around the cloud because the reality is I sort of look at it as this. If you're not doing security in-house, then you're probably not going to do it well in the cloud either. You're better off having someone else focus on that. If you take some of the advanced cloud courses, we typically talk about cloud service brokers, identity management, IAM, etc. Lots of great services and brokers out there that can definitely help in this area. Systems management, how do you manage everything as a whole? Who's doing what? And then business continuity. Again, that's 8% of the test. Again, if you don't need to focus on every one of these sections 100%. If you want to skip one of these before you take the test and you've been in IT a while, you're not going to have a problem passing the test anyways. So, okay. So let's talk about Chapter 1, Exam Objectives. So if you took the real CompTIA course that most of the training vendors provide, again, you're going to have some objectives that are going to be taught, and they're going to be taught in a certain manner, no different. Whether you go over to GK or exam, I'm trying to think of ROI or whatever other training company you may use. It really, in my opinion, most of the CompTIA training, there's certain companies that put out the content and then they just resell it. That's pretty much the dirty little secret there. So again, the content's going to be the same. So let's talk about the objectives. NIST, okay, the National Institute of Science and Technology. Now, NIST is a government agency. It's under the Department of Commerce. One of the things that NIST does is they typically take problems and try to derive solutions and architectures and best practices. Depending on the technology, they may focus on everything or just one area. So they handle everything around technology, generally in science, bio, etc., biology, areas like that. They're all over the map. But they do have a very good and robust cloud computing expertise, and they're really the de facto standard when it comes to cloud frameworks and defining what cloud is as well. So if you haven't been to the NIST Cloud Computing website, my recommendation is you hop over there. The link is in the YouTube channel as well. So cloud computing, what it is. So for the test, the most basic question you can get is to be able to identify what it is. What is cloud computing? So basic cloud computing, I like to call it, essentially an approach where companies basically outsource their not only resources but also their technical talent in a lot of ways as well. Because the reality is even if you're doing work for an employer, chances are if they're doing it in the cloud, they don't have the IT staff that they used to. That's been pretty much a common theme I've been seeing. And so here's my thought. is that cloud computing is really a financial arrangement that the company uses. However, let's be technical here. The test is technical. One of the things doing pre-sales for a very long time around the cloud and professional services as well, I can tell you right now, I've been in many cases where the cloud is not actually the right solution. And again, sometimes the decision is top down instead of bottom up. So cloud computing for the test, you need to understand that it's basically a model for enabling convenient on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources. And I won't read it all to you, but for the test, you're going to want to be able to pick out the definition of cloud computing. So what are the 5 essential characteristics? Now, on the test, you will likely see a question or two around the 5 essential characteristics. And so when you study for this test, you need to be able to memorize the 5 essential characteristics. So when we talk about the cloud, generally a couple things come to mind. Now, on-demand self-service. Now, one of the challenges like with traditional IT has been was that traditional IT didn't respond very quickly in a lot of cases. And that probably didn't help IT either, especially when it took 3 weeks to get someone a volume set up for an Oracle database. These are some of the things. So when we go to the cloud, generally the resources you're requesting should be on demand. So you as a user, you log into your catalog, you log into your dashboard, whatever you want to call it, and you say, hey, I'd like to spin up a VM. Well, if you go over to AWS, Google, or Azure, you go ahead and spin up a VM, and whammo, in a minute on average or less in some cases. A lot of it does depend on the size and the resource you're using. Could be a couple minutes, but again, not too long, it's available. Now, broad network access. This is probably my favorite term in the sense that you don't want to have your cloud resources open to the world. You're going to definitely need to look at VPNs and specific appliances and maybe a direct connect solution as well, depending on how seriously you take your compute resources and the budget that you have. Now, broad network access also does mean that you could access this from any device or any resource that is reasonable. Resource pooling. So this is where you're sharing resources. This is where the bang for the buck comes in for most users as well as the provider, because again, you're sharing resources. So that storage array, which would cost $1.5 million, is being shared among hundreds of users in a lot of cases. So again, this is where the great savings typically would occur. Rapid elasticity. So this is again, basically a feature that should happen. A lot of it really depends on the resource. I'll be very honest. So some resources are going to scale better than others. Some resource providers or cloud providers scale better than others. Buyer beware around this area, but the reality is that you should be able to scale up and scale down when you need to. So for example, if you go to Google Cloud, you want to go ahead and provision a VM, you get billed in a 10-minute interval and then every minute after. It's pretty cool. And then AWS, they do it differently as well as Azure. Measured service. So basically you're going to pay for what you use. Again, that sort of falls into what I just talked about. What are the 3 service models? Now, NIST defines basically software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. Now, for the test, this is, again, the first part of the content is to memorize and know the difference between the 3 service models. Now, if you're going to be a business user using Salesforce.com, let's say, That's software as a service in most cases. Now, on the other hand, if you're a developer and you're using Force.com, then you're probably going to use Salesforce's platform as a service. So again, take your time to understand the differences here. And then what about if you're a company that just put in all their VDI environment in the cloud? Again, probably not, I'm not a fan of VDI in the cloud in a lot of cases. But again, if you don't need performance and great user experience, it's definitely an economical use case. I'll be direct about that. Big data, though, is a great solution in this area as well, just because of the expertise required behind Hadoop, for example. So again, know these three for the test. Now there's 4 deployment models. You have public, private, hybrid, and community. And again, I'm not going to read you the definitions, but the public cloud is exactly what it sounds like. It's open to the public, right? If there isn't any gates to the stadium and you just walk in, it's open to the public, right? But, what happens if you got gates and you need to have a ticket? That's private, of course, goes without saying. And so the public cloud is going to be your AWS, your Azure, your Google Cloud, Rackspace, etc. Private cloud, this is going to be something that the company's going to set up on their own. This could be a VMware vCloud. It could also be a private cloud hosted over at like a provider like CenturyLink or Dimension Data or Rackspace as well. Depending on your connectivity and how you're caged, it could still be considered private. So community cloud. Now this is typically going to be focused around a community. So like if you're military or you're nonprofit or you're part of a partner network or something, this could be construed as a community cloud. So for the test, you're going to want to know the 4 deployment models. Hybrid cloud. Now, generally a hybrid, and this is probably the biggest buzz area right now in the cloud. Everybody's talking about it. All the hardware vendors are telling you how wonderful their hybrid clouds are. And again, a hybrid cloud is going to be where you typically have your private infrastructure with some kind of public cloud config like in Amazon. Good use case of a hybrid cloud could be production in-house where you have your DR out-of-house in the cloud. That's typically a very common use case. And again, the question is for companies, if you do take the Cloud Plus or any other cloud courses, you would spend a lot more time talking about some of this area. I just want to give you a high-level overview and get you ramped up to where you know what to study for the test. And so the question is do you go with public or do you go with private? Now, this is always the $1,000,000 question. So again, if you have no money as a company, then you're pretty much going to go with the public cloud. That's just a fact. Again, if you go with private cloud, you're going to need to have additional security resources. You're going to need additional appliances, maybe Cisco ASAs, maybe you need RSAs, certificates, and a lot of extra overhead to get a private cloud set up the way it should be. Whereas if you go with the public, this is all shared. Your costs are going to be lower. So cloud deployment models, this is a good little diagram to show you. For example, typically this is what you would be used to doing in your IT environments. And then when you go to the cloud, the responsibility that you're going to be managing is going to change. A lot of it's going to be based on the deployment that you go with. So if you go with software as a service and the day before you were managing email, then maybe the next day you don't have any hardware or software to manage, or licensing for that matter. And again, if you put on Office 365, your role could change significantly. And again, for the test, you want to know typically responsibilities that you're going to look at in the cloud. Here's some examples of comparing traditional compute versus cloud computing. Cloud reference architecture. Now, NIST, for example, this resource is from NIST. There's 5 defined roles or actors, as it's called, in NIST. For the test, you're going to definitely want to know the 5 actors and know what they do. Be able to, pick them out or select them from multiple choice or mix and match approach as well. But again, know what the provider is, what an auditor does, etc. Multi-tenancy. So this is, again, the biggest advantage to the cloud from an economics. In my opinion, being able to share resources, that reduces the cost for everyone as well as the provider. Therefore, that's why you go to Amazon and get storage for, less than a penny per gig. Again, if Amazon had to go buy storage for you and only you, whether you used it or not, the cost would be much higher. So let's talk about Chapter 2 briefly, about virtualization. Now, if you go back to the objectives, you'll notice that virtualization was heavily tested. It was like 18% compared to 12% like for, Chapter 1. And so you're going to definitely want to spend some more time on this. What I did is I took the more common areas that you want to know, but also some of the difficult ones that I think a lot of students sometimes skip over or forget to study before they take the test. So basically, virtualization is going to be more focused around solving problems in a lot of cases. So before virtualization, typically what would happen is you would go out and get this brand new server, this brand new storage array, this brand new network switch. And it would be dedicated for a specific use. And if you didn't use all the resources, they would go to waste. And so then came virtualization. This allowed you to share resources. This is, again, where companies were able to take resources and share them among other applications. And so this is again the cost savings. So when we talk about virtualization, we want to understand that it could entail anything from virtualizing an operating system, a storage device, a network resource. But virtualization is essentially a software layer that typically is going to allow you to run multiple operating systems. And instead of you going out there and going to go buy that brand new Dell server or HP server and you run one application on it, you can now run 2, 3, 20 if it's virtualized in a lot of cases. I've seen host to VM ratios as high as 200, which is absolutely insane, but it could be done. But it's very common for companies to run 20, 30, 40 different operating systems on a very large server, in a physical server in some cases. So not uncommon. A lot of it just depends on the application you're running. When we talk about virtualization, a lot of the talk really comes down to efficiency, and I like to look at virtualization as essentially a way for you to take resources from something that is not actually logically segmented, I guess is the way to look at it, and then logically segment them. So basically virtualization is where you're going to create logical resources from the physical resources. Virtualization, again, could entail any part, any resource, like for those folks familiar with VMware, for example, you can virtualize pretty much anything in VMware. You get the CPUs, the memory, the NICs, the disks, switches, whatever. So again, a lot of power behind virtualization. History of virtualization now, IBM was really the GoDaddy, I like to say, of virtualization. They actually started it back in the 60s on mainframes, but then, over time, the open systems folks saw an opportunity to really optimize how virtualization could be done on x86 platforms. So this is a big deal. And VMware was really the initial solution. So now, when we talk about virtualization, again, it's important to understand it's a way to extract resources from the physical hardware. You're logically segmenting them. And so for the test, do understand these basic facts because you'll get tested on this fairly heavily. And one area that I'd like to make sure you get for the test is to understand that there's different types of hypervisors. You have a type 2 and a type 1. And right here is an example of type 1, where the hypervisor is essentially installed on top of the physical hardware. So we'll go through some examples and brands that you may be familiar with here in a minute. But just realize you're installing the hypervisor on top of the hardware. This is a type 1. It's called bare metal. And then a type 2 is where you're going to install the hypervisor on top of the operating system. So again, for those folks used to like a MacBook and you want to run Windows on it, that's a good example of a type 2. And so here's a good comparison between type 1 and type 2. Now on the test, you will likely get a couple, well, I can say I got a couple. But again, what you're going to see on the test is going to ask you to know the difference between the hypervisors as type 1 and type 2, for example. So VMware ESX, Hyper-V, Zen Server, these are bare metal. Hosted is going to be the virtual PC, VMware Server, VirtualBox. And then also, too, just don't know the examples, but also know, which one may be better. Now, if you think about it from this perspective, if you remove the layers for the virtualization, it should be quicker, it should be better, should be more secure. Because if you remove layers and don't install, like in the type 2, on top of an operating system, then you should get a more efficient solution with a type 1. So again, for the test, you want to know sort of the difference and know why you want to use a type 1 versus a type 2, and what situations you may want to use a type 2 over a type 1 as well. Now, here's a short little video. I won't play this for you. You're welcome to play this. The link is right here as well. It's sort of funny. It's by Sophos. Are you an IT superhero? So let's go ahead and talk about the test here before we get into some practice questions. Now, when we talk about taking this test, it is 100 questions. Again, we saw this slide already. I just want to cover one more thing. The link is over here, so if you go to the certification website, it shows you how to sign up for the test. It gives you pretty much what we're talking about right now as well. So it's $294. There are some discounts out there that I'm sure you can find. I will post one or two as well. Okay, so let's talk about a couple mock questions before we wrap this up. Now, the first question, when we talk about cloud computing, remember that we talked about the 5 essential characteristics from NIST, And again, this question is just trying to test you on your knowledge of the NIST characteristics. Remember, measured service, broad network access, they're the correct answers. There is no streamlined support or faster storage when we talk about the characteristics. Now, that doesn't mean that a cloud provider could provide these. It just means that they're not part of the NIST and what we want you to know for the test. Again, know the 5 essential characteristics. Number 2, which of the following may be an indicator that the company may benefit from cloud computing? Well, again, this is a good question. Generally, it would be rapid growth and possibly a workload that could be beneficial to the cloud as well. What are some of the benefits of server virtualization? Now, again, when you're virtualizing a server, what are typically some of the benefits? And, again, when you do your study and do understand that it's going to be faster provisioning and it's going to be greater resource utilization. Now, generally with virtualization, you're not going to want to have dedicated hardware resources. And now this isn't always true, but probably will be true. What should happen is, again, you may or may not experience capital expenses, but for this content, you want to know, what the first 2 are. So, what type of hypervisor is then server? That is type 1. Remember type 1? That is basically a bare metal. Last question. Which of the following might be an indicator of an organization ready for virtualization? And select 3. So high utilization, resource challenged, skilled workforce. Those are typically going to be good use cases for going to the cloud. Hardware dependence, if you're dependent on a specific hardware like HPUX, probably not a good choice, for example, or you're running on mainframes. Again, probably, if you're running on mainframes, going to the cloud and using virtualization probably won't be a good choice. So good luck on your test. Feel free to reach out if I could help you out. I am available for consulting. I really have been focused around data storage and cloud migrations as well. I also do quite a bit of training around the cloud with major vendors as well as CompTIA as well. So good luck on the test. I wish you all luck. And for those folks interested as well, I will also be hosting a couple boot camps here this summer around a couple subject areas. So do take a look out for that. Thank you again, and happy testing. Good luck on your exam. Let me know how